Hello and welcome to another episode of the Mastermind, Body, and Spirit Show. I am your host, Matt Belair. Today's guest has spent over 30 years researching and discovering connections in physics, mathematics, geometry, cosmology, quantum mechanics, biology, chemistry, as well as anthropology and ancient civilizations. These studies have led him to groundbreaking theories, published papers, and patented inventions in unified physics, and are now gaining worldwide recognition and acceptance. In his paper, Quantum Gravity and the Holographic Mass, a prediction of the charge radius of the proton was confirmed with greater accuracy than any other theoretical framework. He is the founder of the Resonance Science Foundation, where he leads physicists, mathematicians, and engineers in exploring unification principles and their implications in our world today and for our future generations. Welcome to the show, Nassim Haramein. Hey,
Hey,
Nassim.
hey, it's great to be here.
I'm so happy to have you on. I always say that I'm excited. I've had some amazing guests, but after going to Egypt with you and going through 90% of the delegate course in the academy, it's truly a privilege and an honor to have you here. So thank you so much for coming.
Thank you. Appreciate it. It was great to have you on board in Egypt.
Yeah, Egypt. Egypt has been. We were talking a little bit before we started about the decompress and being around the outstanding group of people, and that was one thing that I really wanted to share with my friends when I came back. Was not only was it really eye-opening and mind-expanding information, really high-quality physics and science, but the human aspect and all the beautiful, incredible people that showed up and that want to explore and are willing to learn. I think that for me was really the icing on the cake. Maybe we can start there. How was that for you, and what was your motivation for getting everybody together? Because I know that was an idea for you for a long time to actually get people in this space in those sacred sites.
Yeah, I mean, it was amazing. The group quality was unbelievable. The people that showed up, I mean, the amount of resources in terms of knowledge and amazing awareness and so on that was present in the room when the group first got together, it just blew me away. And this is just a small sample of the delegate community from 80 countries all around the world that are participating in the delegate course. And this group we had in Egypt was just it was just the icing on the cake. It was just so awesome. The amount of knowledge in the room and the amount of interaction that occurred, and the amazing support. Like people were so supportive of each other, and and we had amazing guides, and the whole journey was transformative for myself and for most people that I asked in the group. I've not we've not received any negative comments from anybody at any point from a 3-week journey through Egypt, and it was just. But we've certainly received a lot of comments saying how transformed they feel then, and how they're seeing the world from a different perspective when they came back. I think what we uncovered when we were there is significant, and I'm looking forward to writing on it. I'm preparing some material to publish very soon on it. It was such an amazing transformative experience for myself as well.
Yeah, yeah. And being a participant, I can fully agree with all of that. I think that all of us were in awe the whole time and the energy stayed high. Normally, especially for me, when you go into a subject that you're not very strong in, so it's a little bit harder to concentrate and stay aware, but it was absolutely no problem. I was more excited, and when it stopped, I was like, you guys can keep going if you want. I'm eating this up. And so the energy was pretty spectacular. Did you learn anything there that surprised you? Because I was really so excited about the stories from the incredible guides that we had. And I'm just curious if you either deepened the level of understanding and knowledge that you had on Egypt, or if something new came up that you didn't know before.
Yeah, I mean, certainly a lot of the things I had studied since I've studied ancient civilization and specifically Egyptology for almost 30 years, but definitely I learned a lot as well. There was a lot of things that unless you're there and you see them, it's not necessarily written in books. It's not necessarily available out there. There's a lot that's unsaid about Egypt, and there's a lot that's unknown, and so many evidence of advanced tooling, for instance, on very hard surfaces are not described in any history books, in any of the literature you find. You have to actually go there and see it and document it yourself. And so I did learn a lot throughout that trip, and and I confirmed a lot of the things that I had come to conclude on independently by, the research I had done. One of these things was that a significant amount of the structures that are found in Egypt, from temples to pyramidal structure to extremely large statues and obelisks and so on, are not from dynastic Egypt. They are from an earlier civilization, probably pre-cataclysmic civilization. And it was so great to hear our guides being Egyptologists, I mean certified Egyptologists, with degrees, and archaeologists talking about it finally now openly, that like many of the structures that are there are clearly not from dynastic Egypt. Dynastic Egypt came later, found the structures either buried under the sand or found them literally where they are, and and claimed them, which is something that the dynastic kings did all the time, and wrote all over them and put their cartouche on it and and so on. But they didn't construct these things, and this is why I mean, these specific things, some of the stuff they constructed, but um, some of the megalithic structures were not constructed by them. And that's why you don't find anywhere in Egypt a wall, even just one, in which the Egyptian described building the pyramids, for instance, or moving 1,000-ton blocks, or things like that, because you don't just move 1,000-ton blocks. You don't just start pulling on it, and you don't just lift it out of a quarry hole. You don't just float it across the Nile. You just don't do these things. People don't realize the difficulty in lifting even 200-ton blocks, which is clearly seen in Egypt in certain monuments, such as the Valley Temple, the Sphinx Temple, and so on, where they're literally stacked on top of each other. A 200-ton block, you're like that big beside it. I mean, it's big, and people don't realize the level of technology required to move these things. When you look at the 200-ton crane today, you don't even have like a self-standing uh, one foot crane. You need a bridge crane. These bridge cranes are very, very, very large. They roll on very specific rails with very special wheels. They can pick up. They can do a lift even up to 1,000 ton, but then they can only move a few hundred feet along those rails, and then they drop it. They don't go over, hills and sand dunes and desert. And, some of these statues and some of these obelisks come from Aswan quarry. A lot of them come from Aswan quarry. which are 1,000 miles in some case, 1,000 kilometers in some case from where they're found. And so, you know, all this doesn't add up to people pulling on vine ropes and chiseling with copper tools. It just doesn't add up. And it as well, a lot of the things we looked at was the erosion on some of the structure, clearly showing significant erosion, not just in the enclosure of the Sphinx, but on other structures around the Sphinx and other places, showing significant erosion that definitely predates these buildings to not 5,000 years in the fourth dynasty, but much earlier, at least 10 to 12,000 years old. And in some cases, geologists are even talking about much, much older dates, that are kind of difficult to contemplate. The dates that involve, um, uh, around 80,000 years and so on. I mean, those are significantly large dates, um, large span of time. And, but some of the erosion you see on some of these structures weren't this. But at least pre uh, uh, meltdown of the ice age. So we're talking about a civilization that was there long prior, before dynastic Egypt. But I'm just rambling because I'm so excited about everything I saw over there.
Yeah, 100%. Me too. Well, it's good to be excited. And I always say there's a huge difference between reading about it, even having a trusted friend go there, take a photo, but to be there, to experience it, to touch it, to see the stones, it's definitely a game changer. And a
Mhm.
lot of the research I've done, I'm definitely a novice in this, but they talk about the energy that they can create. And coming from, a meditator type background, I could tune in and feel it just washing through my body. Being in the pyramid, in the Great Pyramid, it was very tangible feeling. It was very powerful. And
Mhm.
some of the theories, I think his name's Fred Cook, I don't know, but he was talking about just being able to go through the sacred sites and it almost activates the DNA or some sort of initiation process. But you can definitely feel that energy. So
Yeah,
it
those that night with the three pyramids, under the full moon, harvest full moon was so transformative. So for so many people, was so powerful. But yeah, there's a big difference between talking about it and studying and actually being there and seeing it. And when you see it, I mean, we looked at various things as well that had very clear, very, very clear power tool marks, tubular drill marks, um, that were seemingly cutting through pink granite, very hard surfaces, diorite, and other different stones that are extremely dense, very hard. Like, I mean, there's a tubular drill hole. I mean, we saw many. I don't know if you saw them. We were in different groups. You might have missed some, but it was one so impressive, in Karnak, where it's like 20 um, centimeter hole, like a fairly large, aperture. It's definitely deep into the rock. And because the rock has been quarried later on, that the hole is open, like it's sectioned, so that you only have half the hole, so you can clearly see, the enclosure of the tubular hole, the tubular drill that was used, because you can see the thickness of the drill because there's still remaining, um, uh, center to the tubular drill, so that you can actually see how thick the drill walls were. of the tubular drill, and it was extremely thin, like a 2 millimeter to 3 millimeter thick um, drill walls of the tubular drill, and you can see the striation of how fast it was going inside the rock, how fast it was going in, and I guarantee you, we have nothing today that can produce these results, not anywhere close. And in some cases, we saw very, very clear uh, power tool cuts on very large stone, uh, clearly showing that there was some kind of technology that was much more advanced than copper tools, and people going like this, chiseling away at 1,000-ton block. There's a perfect example in the um, Cairo Museum of a lid of one of those very large box that that they had started to quarry the lid. They would cut the box out with the lid with enough thickness to be able to harvest the lid from the bottom of the box, right? So that the lid came from the same stone in exactly the same place where the box was taken. And so in this case, they start to harvest the lid from the bottom of the box, but clearly the stone must have cracked, and they abandoned the job. And the result is that since they went further than where it cracked, you can see the actual blade thickness that went into the stone, and you can actually see the striation mark of the circular blade that was cutting into it. And it literally looks like uh, modern tooling, that would be used to cut very large slabs of granite, except that in this case the blade thickness is extremely thin compared to what we would use in modern era. So, and the striation tells you that the blade was penetrating the rock at very, very rapid rate. So whatever that blade was made of, it's not something we have readily available to us in 2017. So never mind, Fourth Dynasty Egypt or 12,000 years ago. So there's something very significant there. And if you only had one example, you could say, okay, we can dismiss that, we can ignore that. But there is hundreds, thousands of examples in Egypt alone, never mind all around the world as well, in Maya country and Inca country and so on, all around the world.
Yeah, yeah. 100%. Well, I just had Hugh Newman on, and he was a treat. And I've also talked to Michael Tellinger. And when people look at this stuff, Robert Schock as well, and they go there and they study it, you just find these mysteries, and you have to look a little deeper. And the story that is, the common story doesn't really add up.
It does. And finally, archaeologists and Egyptologists are starting to finally agree and let go of the idea that, oh no, it was all copper tool. And, it's funny because people like us are called irrational for talking this way. But in fact, what we're doing is only looking at the factual evidence on site and coming to very clear conclusion based on the factual evidence. It's actually the mainstream archaeology that's not doing good science by somehow ignoring the thousands of evidence staring them in the face that something significant, something very amazing happened, and that and that these monuments and much of the culture that's in Egypt and other places around the world does not come like that culture, that knowledge, that information didn't come from them internally developing over the years. For instance, you see in Egypt some of the most amazing structure being the earlier one, and then you see a decline in knowledge, right? And even inside these traditions, the Mayans, the Incas, the Egyptian, and others, none of them claim to actually have done this or have had the knowledge. They all said that they got the knowledge from what they call the sun gods or the gods and so on, that had, all the knowledge about mathematics and writing and engineering and all this, and that they learned from
Yeah, well, it's very clear when you go back to Sumeria, in the tablets that they're still decoding. That's what it says. And if you continue to look at that, pretty much everybody that goes in and takes a peek ends up there. And then they start to look at the oldest civilizations they could find, and they find the same thing. And the stories are matching up around the world. And, it is logical. You look at it, and we can't build it now. And if you go forward in time, we're supposed to get smarter, right? We're not supposed to be really smart all of a sudden and then go through a process. That doesn't make any sense.
that. Right.
So when you start to take the story seriously and look at it and then find evidence and be open to other evidence, you're going to start to really explore. One of the
Right.
interesting talks I saw with Michael Tellinger was where he put the pyramids and the sacred sites side by side to a computer chip, and they look the exact same. And so, to me, looking at the planet, if there were these sun gods or something coming in, or you at least had planetary awareness, we could say 100 years from now, we all work together. And we would easily have that technology where we would work together and we would be able to manipulate the atmosphere and the energy of the planet in a beneficial manner. So even it could have been something like that. So
Well,
I know that.
yeah,
Go ahead.
yeah. Well, it was so refreshing to hear some of the archaeologists that were with us saying, yeah, this piece of evidence, gravitational control is the only way this could have been done. It's like, yeah, you know, unless something we don't know about, but certainly gravity control must have been present for some of these pieces of evidence. Like I said, if you have 1,000-ton block and it's been moved hundreds of miles from where it's found across mountain ranges and and rivers like the Nile, you like I said, a crane that would do that is not reasonable. First of all, the crane would have to be brought on massive trucks, right? Because the crane would be in pieces. You'd need massive truck to bring the crane to the quarry. Then you would have to set up. You couldn't be on like all this uneven terrain you see there in Aswan. You'd have to set up somehow to level a region that you could like set up the crane there. Would be immense, right? It would be one of those bridge cranes, and and then it would maybe be able to roll the stone out, of the quarry, but it would only go a few hundred feet, and then you would have to like undo the whole thing, right? Move all the rails and all the pieces and everything, and then reset it up a little further and level the ground and all this stuff, and then move the block again 100 feet, a few hundred feet, and literally there's like mountain ranges, like not very high mountains, but like hills, that are fairly significant between the quarry and the Nile. And then you got to cross the Nile. Somehow you got to put 1,000-ton block on some boat, right? And cross the Nile. I mean, it just doesn't add up. It really doesn't. And so at one point you gotta really start to think outside the box. you really have to start to think about civilizations that are not just advanced civilization relative to the ancient Egyptian, but civilization that were more advanced than what we have today. So, civilization that might have understood how to control gravity, civilization that might have had technology that was energetic enough that it could ionize the stone to the point where it was malleable. Because there's a lot of evidence of that as well, where the stone might have been in a state of plasma at one point, fairly malleable, and it could be shaped, and so on. There's all sorts of things. You have to start thinking outside the box to be able to resolve these problems, and it's not gonna be vine ropes and slaves pulling. It just isn't.
And for me coming back, you're in an interesting position being a physicist and having a science foundation, and what you say or how you say it, people get to really pick it apart, and
Mhm.
do all that, where I can just sit here with a beard and be a snowboarder and do that kind of thing. I can just kind of freely say whatever the heck I want. And
Right.
so when I came back, I would say different things, and some people could handle an advanced civilization or something out of this world and somebody couldn't. But one of the ways that I said that was just completely logical to me, and I already used it once, was just imagine we start working together tomorrow. Everybody on the planet, Team Earth, everybody gets along. Team China, Team Russia, Team Canada, Team USA. We're all one team, baby. And
Yeah.
then we start working on science. We start working on anti gravity. We start working on whatever. We work together. You bet your ass we are going to the stars. We have, okay, maybe not 100 years, give us 500. We're definitely doing it. We're making leaps every single day, and I know that's a huge part of your work. For me, people like you, sometimes it's like I'm just smart enough to know how smart you are when I read something like your paper being confirmed with greater accuracy than any other theoretical framework. I don't exactly know what that means. Like I kind of do, but that's a big deal. And what you've put together is a very big deal. So you're doing the hardcore science work, and it's being proved. So do you want to talk a little bit about that? And you can steer into ancient civilizations as long as you want. But I was like curious about that. If there's anything that the public should know about leading science and the possibilities and what you're working on, and maybe how that might apply to us. Because for me, it's just opening the mind. If the 4 minute mile, you
I
can't do it
understand.
unless it's impossible.
Yeah, I understand. It's hard for people to go there and open their mind. I mean, it's so jarring for most people to even hear me say things like that. Like, you know, but again, the evidence is sitting there staring you in the face, and you have to come up with an understanding that goes beyond what you can imagine, past even what we have today. Now, why would that be so hard for people? Well, because it's always hard for people to imagine something new. When the Wright brothers flew the first plane, although that can be debated too. There was people in Europe doing some pretty cool stuff. Um, but let's just give them credit for that for now. Um, you know, um, it took, and of course at the time there was no internet and all this, but it still took years and years, 10 years before um, physicists stop publishing papers saying that flight would never be achieved, and write physics saying and proving in their theory that nothing heavier than air could ever fly. Because they had all kinds of schemes, mathematical schemes, in which they would prove that that could not be done. And those papers kept on getting published for 10 years after the first flight. And so, the none of these physicists had noticed that, like, birds and bees were doing it every day. But remarkable. This is where observation is critical. And so, yeah, some of the theoretical work I did is very unusual, is very controversial. But at the end of the day, the competing theory is string theory. And in some 3 decades and billions of dollars of investments, thousands and thousands of physicists working on string theory, not one physical, measurable prediction was able to be rendered from the theory. Um, where, and then the standard model, made very specific predictions that are very important about fundamental constants and certain fundamental particles. One being the proton, like and the nuclei of an atom. It's very important in quantum physics. And these predictions were attempting to be confirmed in 2013, just after I published my unified view of physics solution and my prediction of what the radius of the proton should be. And my prediction happened to be 4% smaller than the standard model. And so I had the choice in the paper to say that my model, unfortunately, was less accurate than the standard model by 4%, or to say that further um, experiment may confirm a 4% smaller radius for the nuclei of atoms or for the proton. And I left it to that, and then a few months later, unknown to me, in an accelerator in Geneva, they were attempting to confirm the radius the proton model of the prediction of the standard model, and they found a radius that was smaller by 4%, and of course it matched my prediction extremely well. In fact, my prediction is inside the margin of error of their experiment. So that means that although it's within 0.00036 of the measurement, um, it might be actually exact, and the measurement is getting closer and closer to the prediction. And the standard model is off by 4% at this point. And so it really kind of mess up a lot of the standard model because if the radius of the proton is different, it changes some of the fundamental constants interaction in quantum physics, and everything goes sideways. And so they're really not excited about that. The Reinberg constant and others can be affected. We published papers showing that actually you can extract those other constants from that same model that I initially published, which is a holographic model of the proton. And it actually is very accurate, not only for the proton anymore, because we published papers showing that you can extend the model to the electron and all the electron clouds for the table of elements. So you can output all the table of elements with extreme accuracy across all of the various orbitals of the electron. And it's very powerful. It outputs all the correct constants. And so I think that, there is a slow but steady motion towards this new view. And it's starting to be taught in schools around the world as an alternative view to the standard model. And I think it has very much a lot of power in terms of understanding the universe, but as well a lot of power in engineering new technology that could lead to the type of technology you require that we see in these ancient civilizations around the world to move these megalithic structures. So there's a correlation there, and the correlation meets in very interesting way, which is something I found some 25 years ago that got me going on the ancient civilization side of things, is that this new theory, this theory of physics that describes the material world as a result of fluctuation in the structure of space itself, meaning that space is not empty, it's full of energy, electromagnetic fluctuations that we don't measure, but that actually we started to measure now. There's direct measurements of the vacuum fluctuations now. It's called as quantum vacuum or zero point energy, and that the energy in the space actually makes up the material world. Well, interestingly, when you render those equations I wrote, you end up with very specific geometric relationship between these oscillations in space, and these geometry match some of these ancient symbols you find on temples all around the world. So one of them being the one that's behind your head there. And so really, this kind of links everything together, and it leads us to something very, very powerful. And I know, again, this is all very hard to think, to take in. You can be challenged in thinking this way. Of course, it's unusual. Of course, it's bleeding edge. But I assure you that it's not coming from just some wishful thinking. It's coming from significant research. And I'm not the only one coming to those conclusions at this point. There's many other scientists and physicists coming to similar conclusions, although they can't necessarily publicly endorse it because the institutions are not excited about this revolution that's occurring, this renaissance that's occurring in science, because it's tumbling the old guards, and much of the books that are in the institutions are going to have to be rewrote to actually match the new understanding that's emerging. So scientists that have come forward supporting these views have got severely punished. Some of them lost their jobs. Some of them lost their peer relationship. I mean, it's very, very difficult. So it's a long journey.
Yeah, and that's where I just want to commend you personally for having the courage to just follow your own way, to do it, just to not just go down the path that this is what you're supposed to do. I've only had that a fraction in my life, being maybe more intuitive and really into martial arts, and you can't heal your own body, or you can't do this, and like, what? Like, yes, I can, and then I'll figure it out. And it's been more of an internal journey, but I faced maybe a fraction of that. I didn't have the peer review and the eyes and all that pressure to just kind of conform. So to pursue those theories, and what you felt, I just want to commend you on that, because when you go down a path, and let's say the person in the institution or whatever, and you've done this way, 1+1 is 2 your whole life, and then all of a sudden somebody comes along and changes it, that's a hard pill to swallow. But we are in a world now where we need to really move towards truth, towards community, towards kindness, towards collaboration, towards resonance, coherence.
Right.
And
science
so
is all about discovering new ideas, And so if you're close to new ideas, then it's no longer science. Now it's back into dogma. That's the thing. And so, and like you said, 1+1 makes 2. Well, actually, that's unproven to this day. People don't realize that. There's a problem with 1+1 makes 2, because you have to define 1, and 1 is very difficult to define. Turns out, there's a great uh, um, History Channel, I think, is who produced this um, um, uh, little movie, a little film that you can find. I think it's on YouTube, called Dangerous Knowledge, and it's about four mathematicians that try to understand very important but very esoteric math that have to do with infinities, and 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 one of them proved that there is an infinite amount of infinities. So like think about that for a minute. It's kind of might boggle your mind a little bit, but Cantor did an amazing job, but all of them ended up in institutions and completely rejected from their peers. Some of them committed suicide, you know, and not because they were working on infinities, just because like the pressure from the institution and their peers, like drove them into depression and insanity. So yeah, it's difficult. But they mentioned, by the way, that 1.1 plus one, there's been books that thick written about, because there's a fractional problem. See, an infinite amount of infinities is hard to comprehend. But think about it. If you think about a fractal structure, then it starts to make sense, because at any boundary in a fractal, you'll find an infinite amount of division inside it, right? So each boundary is an infinity, and it's embedded into an infinite amount of those infinities, right? So
Mm-hmm.
actually, mm, you know, and I will work on this eventually. I just haven't had time. That work was never actually fully understood and completed, and I'm definitely planning on completing those theorems, those mathematical theorems, eventually when I have time to start to think about it or to work on them. But certainly, uh, you can start. You can imagine that if you say 1 plus 1 equals 2, you have to define 1. And so if you say one something, right? Like one pencil, right? So, well, or one mouse, right? Well, one mouse is made out of a lot of things. There's a wheel on it, there's a click on it, there's a right and a left button, there's like a thingy. Okay, so what are you meaning one? Right? There's a fractal. Okay, you mean the combination of all these things being one, right? But where do you divide that? Like, because that mouse is made out of billions of atoms, right? So and they're constantly falling off it. So like, you can't contain it. You can't. So what do you mean one? One what? Like one assembly of all these atoms? Well, atoms are made of subatomic particles. Are you meaning the subatomic particle? I mean, basically, you, trying to resolve 1 plus 1 makes 2 can lead you to trying to understand the fundamental forces of creation that makes things in the first place, right? So this is how far you can end up going down the rabbit hole trying to solve 1 plus 1 is 2. And so, yeah, of course, 1 plus 1 is 2 has some value um, you know, in terms of practicality, in adding things and subtracting things and mathematics, but in its fundamental, in its fundamental meaning, there's something very important, very deep that's not necessarily looked at, that's not necessarily explored. Um, and that's why that movie is called Dangerous Knowledge, because it can be dangerous to want to actually go down that rabbit hole. Uh,
Mm-hmm.
so yeah, and really what it says at the end of the day, if you do go down that rabbit hole, which I did, I don't know. just because I'm that kind of person. What it says is that things are just not isolated from each other. Everything is connected in a deep manner, that there is infinities within everything, that there's singularity at the center of all things, that any, when for instance, when you think of yourself, right, you think of yourself as one person, right? But you're actually 100,000, no, actually 100 trillion cells, right? So that's way more complex than one, right? So 100 trillion cells. Each cell, like each second, all these cells are crunching about between 10 to 100 billion chemical changes, and then they, all this is like you're dividing cells, million cells a second. I mean, like there's all this, so you're constantly changing. So when you say one, I'm one thing, like what do you really mean, right? And then each cell is made of 100 trillion atoms. Okay, so now it's getting really complex, right? And
Yeah.
so the nature of reality is not so obvious. And we tend to just go with the program because our senses are fairly limited. So things appear to be separate from each other. They appear to be finite. They appear, we get a sense that like, oh, the material world, oh yeah, it's this solid stuff. But then when you look closely, you can't find solid stuff. All you find is electromagnetic fluctuations that we call electrons and that we call protons. And, we don't actually find solid stuff. The solid stuff we call reality is made out of 99.9999999% space. And the stuff that's not space, that's how much space there is in the atom. And the stuff that's not space in the atom, the parts that we call particles, are little charge that we know are there because there's a little charge there, but there's no billiard balls. There's no there's no thing in the thing, that you're looking at. So really, what are we talking about? We're talking about field interactions. Field interaction in the structure of space. And now we're getting somewhere. Now we're starting to get deeper into the nature of reality, something much deeper, right? Now you start to think, okay, maybe it's like a field and it's dividing itself, and where it divides, it makes a little boundary, little electrostatic charge, and that's what I'm seeing when I'm touching stuff, right? I'm actually experiencing boundaries in space. Maybe hard for people to integrate, but it's important to understand that.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think that you and I, for sure, in private, I'd love to talk to you for 20 hours and go, because I suspend disbelief because I've done an immense amount of research and practices to get to the space where that just makes sense, like logical sense. And you're touching a lot of things. It goes to, kind of spiritual texts of we're all one. And when you go and you're kind of exploring, who am I? Well, I'm not my arm. I'm not my physical object. I'm not my thoughts. I'm not just what I place my attention on. And so what the heck am I experiencing it? And you're coming at from a physics perspective as, okay, here's a cup. Let's look at the cup. Oh, this is a weird world. What's going on here? And so you're kind of bridging this gap of consciousness and physics, and you're open to what you're finding. You're not saying how it should be or how someone told you it's got to be. It's like, this is what I'm finding, and this is also what I'm experiencing. And
Right.
for me, I'm on the experience side, and you're bringing out the physics side. Do you want to explore either your thoughts on consciousness and the nature of consciousness, or get into your arc crystal and some of the technology that you're bringing forth, because some of the studies there are pretty fascinating, and or anywhere else you want to go. This is fun for me.
There's I've been rambling. I'm sorry,
That's
but
good.
it just that kind of stuff excites me, and it's been exciting me for a long time because I mean, for me, there's not really other pursuit in life than to get to understand ourselves deeper and our world around us and our relationship to it. But you can imagine that. Okay, well, first of all, when I start to think about matter being the result of a field, then I realized that we had discovered that field already almost 100 years ago. It was called the quantum vacuum fluctuation. That is, when we start to write quantum field theory, when we realize that energy is quantized at the atomic level. And what I mean by quantized, that means that it's like little packets of energy. They're like defined in little packets of energy. Einstein called them photons when he wrote these papers on the photoelectric effect, which he got the Nobel Prize for. People don't realize Einstein didn't get the Nobel Prize for relativity, which is more known for. He got the Nobel Prize for actually contributing to the start of quantum theory. But he so these packets of energy, when they try to figure out, like, well, what are the wavelengths that they go to, like how small do they get, the equation said, well, they go to infinity. There's an infinite amount of packets of energy in the structure of space everywhere. Now, people might think, what is he talking about? Like, if there was energy in the space everywhere, why? Like, I wouldn't know about it, right? Like, it would be obvious. Like, there would be massive amount of energy everywhere in space, right? Well, it's not that clear. It's not that easy because, like I said, our senses and our measuring devices are not that well tuned. So, for instance, until recently, I mean, historically speaking, we can we thought that the only part of the electromagnetic field there was the visible light, until we start to discover, oh, there's X-ray, oh, there's infrared, oh, there's ultraviolet, oh, there's gamma ray. All this stuff was completely invisible to us until we got technology sophisticated enough that we start to see parts of the electromagnetic field that is not readily available to our senses, right? Unlike visible light, which we see every day. Now, some dude forgot some radioactive material on his desk, and there was some photographic plates beside it, and guess what? He realized, wow, it's impacting my photographic plates, so there must be some electromagnetic things coming out of this little radioactive material. And so uh, eventually x-rays were discovered and all this. And so, same thing, there's radio waves in the space right around you. There's hey, there's background radiation noise from the so-called Big Bang, all around us. There's stuff in the space. There's a lot of energy in this. There's the Wi-Fi in your house. There's all this stuff going on, and it's very real. It does very good job at transporting information. Like your cell phone, transport your voice, no problem, to the nearest repeater antenna, and all this. Your satellite TV works because it's able to communicate to a satellite, a few thousand miles up, so it really is remarkable, and it's very much present and it's very much real. Like you tune a little crystal to the right frequency and you get a radio set, you know, and all of a sudden you hear music come out of the box, and it's not like there's a band inside the box. And I'm leading to something. I know I'm rambling, but I'm leading to something, and that is that, like, you know, the the what so imagine that, like, there is electromagnetic fluctuations that are occurring that are even much higher frequency, much shorter wavelength than all the stuff we use and that we're accustomed to, that we can measure with our current technological capacity, with the current, you know, resolution that we have on the electromagnetic field. Well, you know, it turns out that quantum theory that eventually predicted that it was infinite amount of fluctuation in each point, right? Well, it turns out that, like, it probably has a limit, at least in our current universe, for the pixel size of that fluctuation in space. That's called the Planck size, the Planck length, right? Which is basically the time that a photon would take to go across itself at the speed of light. Okay, and so it's very high fluctuation, very short wavelength. Think of it as like a little spinning vortex, but it's very tiny, like a tiny pixel of space-time. And and it's everywhere. And guess what? We're starting to be able to measure it. We're starting to be able to actually directly measure it. And you know, there's the Casimir effect, but there's as well other measurements that are now being made. But never mind that. The thing is so small that if I grew one Planck oscillator, one of those little pixels, so it was the size of a proton, okay, the nuclei of an atom, which is already extremely small. If I grew one, actually, if I grew one Planck, so it was the size of a grain of sand, then the proton inside the atom would be the size spanning a diameter from the sun to Alpha Centauri, which is approximately 40 trillion kilometers. Okay, that would be the size of the proton if the Planck was the size of a grain of sand. So you can imagine, guess what? You're not experiencing the Planck field directly. You're not, you know, it's very difficult to measure, right? And so on. So, but we know it's there. It's predicted by theory, and we're now in experiments able to measure it. So what I did is I used those little Planck oscillators, and I said, okay, well, maybe if they're everywhere, they're extremely dense, right? Because they're so small, there's a lot of energy in every centimeter cube of space. I started to calculate how they interact with each other. And when I did, I started to, I mean, it took me 20 some years, but I eventually found an equation where I realized, and the equation is super simple. I can't believe it took me that long to find it. But I realized that the amount of information, so think of each Planck as a little bit of information, like a pixel of information, that the amount of information inside the proton relative to the amount of information on the surface of the proton is the exact mass of the proton. That is, the amount of information able to escape the proton is what we call mass, right? Because the proton is the mass of the material world we see. So actually, we're actually just looking at information moving through the field, and we think of it as energy or mass, right? E equals mc squared, so you can interchange mass for energy. So all of a sudden, it's a completely different view of the world, mass, energy, you can imagine right away if that equation is correct, and as you said, it's been confirmed by experiments now, that means we start to understand the source of mass. That means we might be able to control mass, we might be able to control gravity, right? Very quickly from these equations. It leads directly to gravity control. Now we're getting back to that. But as well, when I did these equations, the thing that blew my mind, that was so remarkable, is when I calculated how much information are inside one proton, it turned out that it was the same amount of information, the same amount of mass as all the other protons in the universe. The mass of the universe came out in one proton. Okay? So take my example of the grain of sand and a bubble the size of the diameter between the sun and Alpha Centauri, and you're putting the sand in there and you're calculating the mass of all the sand in there, and it turns out it's the mass of the universe. Okay? And so basically, right, think about it this way, that the proton is not isolated. The proton has all the information of all the other protons in the universe inside it holographically, right? Imprinted on the structure of space. And, people might say, what the heck is he talking about? Like, he has the mass of the universe inside the proton. Imagine an equation in which you have the mass of the universe, okay, in it, and by the time you solve the equation, which is not a very long equation, you end up with the exact mass of one proton in the universe. And it's exact by like 8-digit accuracy, like after the like significant digit. I mean, it's super exact, right? If you start with the mass of all the protons in the universe and you end up with the mass of one proton, and it's exact just by their relationship. And so, but basically, just by the relationship of the mass of all these bits of information relative to the surface of the proton, right? And it produces the correct answer. Well, of course, then you start to think, okay, so then the proton is that stable because the mass of the universe is inside and the mass of the universe is outside. So it produces a boundary condition in the structure of space that's like a bubble that's really, really stable. We've never seen a proton decay ever, right? It's the most stable thing that we've ever encountered. So now you start to think, oh, maybe then mass and energy is the result of information flowing in and flowing out, like in relation, with the field. So everything is feeding into the field, and the field is feeding back the information in terms of how it organizes in the space. Now you're actually getting to the source of reality, how things actually come to be organized the way we see them, and biology as well, right? And then eventually consciousness. So this was a really long answer to your question, but basically,
amazing.
Basically now you can start to think, well, maybe consciousness is actually just the feedback of this information between the field and you. And so that consciousness is not a thing that's produced in your head, like the radio box you have on your desk doesn't have the band in it, but it's tuned into a field of information. Maybe you're tuned into a field of information, and your transceiver, right? You're receiving and transmitting. And so you're transmitting information by what you do and how you interpret the field, and you're receiving information, interpreting the field, and it's continuously feeding back into the field. You're participating in a universal field of information, in a global field of information, what Rupert Sheldrake called the morphogenetic field of the world. And so all of a sudden, a whole lot of things starts to make a whole lot of sense, right? For instance, very esoteric ideas, like very esoteric things that were measured. For instance, remote viewing. Might think of remote viewing as something really esoteric, but actually it was measured, and these measurements were published in peer-reviewed journals, the best journals in the world, in the 70s, showing that definitely, uh, with non-trivial statistical analysis, most people are able, if they concentrate, to remote view a place that they've never been at, with like some 80% accuracy. Okay, how is it that somebody can remote view something somewhere they've never been at? Well, if all the information is in every point and you're interacting with this field, then you have access to the information. You see, things like entanglement in laboratories start to make sense. How particles all of a sudden can be entangled in such a way that if you change this particle, this one change instantaneously, right? Because of course, if both have all the information of all things, then you can have this condition where you can measure entanglement between two particles. In fact, what this says is that the whole universe is entangled. Every particle is entangled with every other one. You cannot separate particles from the whole. They're all part of this one field that's interacting, and that that leads directly to many of the things you see in ancient knowledge all around the world, talking about everything is one, and spirituality and all this stuff. So it's a long answer to your question, but we had to resolve the nature of reality to answer
I think I
it.
started with 1 + 1 and that happened. So
Right.
that was spectacular. For me, I've had a lot of those experiences and references. Like Tom Campbell was on, and he's a physicist, and he was at the Monroe Institute for Consciousness, and he was very skeptical about remote viewing and astral projection. And in a short time, he was able to do it, and then do it with another person beside him in a different room and remote view the same thing. And then he started to explore the physics of it. And for me, in exploring more of the consciousness realm, if you um, give out an equation, so I'm seeing the equation as a consciousness explorer, the way that I kind of feel into it is like energy, what is now possible? So when we look at Yogananda in the autobiography of a yogi, his master's appearing on an orb. And that was kind of my inspiration of, as a martial artist, can I break this stone? Well, when I went to China, there was a master that could break stone with 2 fingers, and he did it with his energy. He did it by years of qigong, and he could break bigger ones over his head. So that was unbelievable. I was like, holy crap. And so I see it as this like field of energy. So I guess my question to you, for me, I think, levitation, astral projection, all of these things become possible. Is there a way that the average person could apply what you're learning into their daily lives to maybe experience reality or consciousness in a more fulfilling and more expansive way? Or what are the implications to the scientific community adopting this equation and working with it, and then what becomes possible?
Well, okay, there's lots there, but certainly, you know, what's really exciting about these new views, and I want to clarify as well. I'm not the only one that's starting to think this way. There's very well-known physicists, some of the best in the world, that are starting to think this way and write theory based on these views. For instance, new theories are emerging now talking about how every particle is entangled with every other particle through little tiny micro wormholes, and that's coming from the top physicists in the world, um, and and that um, and that the fabric of space is riddled with these connections, these connective, entangled structures, and so, but basically, um, you can. What's exciting is that all of a sudden, all these things that are thought to be spiritual, um, like Qigong masters and all this stuff that like is in the woo-woo side of things, although they actually produce measurable effect, like when a qigong master breaks a stone with two fingers, it's like, okay, well, how did that happen, right? um, you know um, all of a sudden, and remote viewing and all this stuff, all of a sudden you start to realize that actually that's just physics we didn't understand, right? So it's present in ancient knowledge, like, in various traditions around the world, but it's basically just a level of physics that was never actually well understood. And when the physics we're reaching now is starting to explain these phenomena. And so I tend to venture, and I've said this before, that all spiritual knowledge is just physics we haven't understood yet. It's just the way things work. It's just the way the universe works. And the fact that we're conscious and present and be able to even think about it, right there is evidence that there's something much deeper than the standard physics we've written. Um, the fact that we were here writing those physics, is already like remarkable. Um, so, so all of a sudden, it opens the door to really exploring these knowledge base that are present in ancient civilization, but with an optic, with like in the context of understanding the physics of it. Like most of these tradition talks about this fundamental field that permeates everything that the masters are able to manipulate, right? That they're able to modify the behavior of this chi or of this prana, or it has many names, mana in Hawaiian tradition and all this, and make it do things, in some cases heal people, in some cases, extract information to be able to remote view something, or all of a sudden that leads to technology too. you know if you can manipulate the field with your consciousness, that means you can actually make technology that does that too, that does it very efficiently, very powerfully. Now we're talking gravitational drives, we're talking quantum computing, we're talking, artificial intelligence, we're talking, oh my God, like the doors open and the rabbit hole becomes a wormhole. And all of a sudden, going across the galaxy becomes possible, going across the universe becomes possible. I mean, all of a sudden, your civilization takes a huge leap in its evolution. If this is all correct, I mean, what it leads to will blow your mind. It will be the largest step in human evolution since the beginning of modern era, and or history as a whole, written history anyway, the one we know of. The the evidence is that, um, well, first of all, we know, and this is fairly recent, that most stars have planets around them. We thought planets were really rare in the universe. I used to debate this with physicists 25 years ago, 20 years ago, even 15 years ago. We thought that planets were rare in the universe. But there was no empirical data to support that. It was just a conservative approach to the world. I thought the contrary. I thought there was no reason why planets many stars couldn't form planets around them from the models that I had developed of cosmology. But um, but as well, we thought water was rare. We thought that water was a very rare compound in the universe. So our probability calculations for life to be out there was very low, right? So because we thought, okay, well, we need water and we need planets, and since both are rare in the universe, there must be very little life out there. But since then, all that has been reversed. In fact, we're having a hard time finding stars that don't have planets. And when we calculate the amount from what we found so far of exoplanet, planets outside our solar system, the probabilities of planets being able to sustain life outside our solar system in our galaxy alone is in the billions. Okay? In the billions. Okay? So you can imagine there could be a lot of life out there. A lot. It could be teeming with life. There's billions of galaxies. I'm just talking about ours. Right? Now, we have about 150 to 200 years of modern technical developments on our planet. We went from horse and buggy in 200 years, right, to being able to fly satellites into orbit and go to the moon and whatever, and cell phones and so on. So I guarantee you there could be civilizations out there that have 1,000 years more advanced than us. Now, what do you think a computer looks like 1,000 years from now, right? Well, there's a great picture of like, I think it's like a few megabytes hard drive that's being moved out of IBM labs in the 1970s, I believe. And they have like a semi truck to move the hard drive. Okay, that's that was a few megabytes at the time. Right now, like on the SD microchip, you can have gigabytes on a thing that's like you need your you need your glasses to like read on it how many gigs there is in there, right? So what does it look like 1,000 years from now? I guarantee you it's not something that you're needing a mouse and a keyboard to interact with, right? I guarantee you it's not anything like that. Because, and as well, so you can imagine if you discover that there's a fundamental field that all of matter is produced from, and that produces the forces of gravity, and you're able to control them, the device you're going to build most likely doesn't get controlled by a keyboard and a mouse neither. It could get controlled directly from you, you know, interacting with the field, right? Everybody could become chi masters. Everybody could like get to that level where they're able to interact with the field just even by knowing it's there. I mean, those chi masters, they're able to do this because they actually understood and accepted that that field is there early on, and then they start to think about how to engineer it, how to interact with it to get it to do what you want it to do, right? Well, it's just like that technologically as well. So, I think if this is all correct and there's evidence that it is, there's a really bright future in front of us if we're able to allow our minds, our soul, our spirit, our ambitions to actually go there. And if we don't continuously, shoot ourselves in the foot by rejecting anything new that comes our way.
Yeah,
It's a big
I
leap.
100% agree.
Yeah.
I think so, but it also makes a lot of sense if you know just kind of look at things and how much we've developed in the last 100 years. And I read something a long time ago about the telescoping of intelligence and how it's not just happening linear. We're making these massive leaps now. And if you just look at video games, I started with Atari. Now kids' first video game is virtual reality. So in 20 years, what's the virtual reality version going to be? It's going to be something absurd. And especially we're doing this, I feel like the scientific community and some of it, and we're not cooperating as much as we could be, especially between countries. And if we can start to bring that cooperation together with leading science, with the intention for good of all, we can really move resources, move technology, and moves things and progress extremely quickly. um,
Well,
One of the questions.
that would
Go ahead.
require that the military industrial complex collaborate. And
Hmm.
that's
Hmm.
where we have to get to. We have to stop fighting with each other. And but as well, we have to change the structure of our financial, uh, uh, resource-based structure, so that actually war is not um, a profitable venture. you know, and I mean that's what's driving the agenda currently is that you know, some of the largest industry on the planet profits from war and from disturbance in the interactions between countries. I think in general, um, humans are actually very pacifists, and everybody has the same needs. They need to be taken care of, and they need to take care of their family, and everybody wants to be in peace. Nobody wants to be at war. So like this can occur, um, but it's gonna take a very big um, it's gonna take a very big change in the mentality, um, and that change is occurring. The transformation is occurring everywhere around the world. You can see it emerge. People are breaking through their limitations and starting to see that they can connect and they can unify with other people around the world. That we're all humans, that and that we all have the same needs. It's not because a person is in Iraq or in Iran or in Russia or in other, that they don't have the same needs, and that they're not, the same humans, thriving uh, for happiness. And so if we can all be mindful of that and relinquish our judgments and actually unify it, then we can make this transformation happen.
100% agree. And I've looked at deeply into the problem, and the problem is pretty epic and large, and ideally things can shift, but it shifts, I think, individually and then through your community and country and all that kind of thing. I was curious if you could change 1 to 3 things on the planet, whether it's a mindset or introduce a technology, what would you offer to expedite this process of healing? And some people call it the new earth or the awakening or whatever you want to call it. I like just to call it improve the planet as it is, because right now there's lots of areas for improvement. So if you could, kind of inject something into the global consciousness, maybe a belief or a technology or a mindset, would you add anything?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, so I have 3 things. The
You can
first
do
thing,
5 or 20. I just said 3. I don't care.
uh, the first thing I would introduce is people taking time every day to reflect within themselves, of where they're coming from and what's important. Any type of meditation, whatever that, so that they can actually connect with that field of information that they stem from, that their life stems from. And so, and from that place, then go, like, start their day and go into the world. I think that would make a huge difference if everybody did this every day. um, Outside of dogma and religion and all this, just a self practice of a little bit of focusing inward before the focus outward. Remember that boundary condition that's created from the inside to the outside. And then certainly, I would if I could introduce technology, like you know technology that extracts energy from the structure of the vacuum. And there's a lot. There's 10 to the 93 grams of these little Planck oscillators in every centimeter cube of space. So if we extract 1/10 of 1 billionth of what's inside 1 centimeter cube of space in terms of this fundamental energy that I use to solve these equations, then we could run the planet forever, thousands of years on 1 centimeter cube of space. So, like, um, so this kind of technology will transform our planet. This is a linchpin, because our society, our financial structures, and our industry are driven by energy production, oil industry, arm productions, and so on. And so all of a sudden, if there is an introduction of a technology that doesn't require any of this stuff, that is ecological, and that is supportive of life instead of destructive of life, then it could have a very deep, deep impact on our society. And I believe that will be the case if we make this transition, if we survive this very important moment in our evolution, a moment from where we go from a society that believe that resources are scarce, that we are separate, and we must fight for resources, to a society that realizes that there's an infinite amount of resources in the structure of space everywhere, and that we have no need to fight for it. Um, I mean, that that transition is going to happen because these new understandings have occurred and these new technologies have emerged. So I think that would be my second choice. And then my third choice would be that these technologies are then brought to gravitational control level, which is, goes hand to hand with extracting this energy from the vacuum, and that this will lead to a space-bound society, a society that doesn't live on the surface of our planet, but that lives in space, because planetary systems are unstable. They don't just hang around for billions and billions and billions of years and never change. They do change. We know that for a fact. They will lose their atmospheres. They will change the structure of their continents. Everything will change. That's a given. When is more of the question. And from what we know from the past, we're way overdue. We've been very, very stable for a very long time, and it's remarkable. But I would, and I'm not the only one saying that. I mean, Stephen Hawking and some of the best physicists on the planet are all saying we gotta find an exit plan really quick in the next 100 years, because it's critical. And so gravity control is the next step. That doesn't mean that you don't come to the earth anymore, but when you do, there's not cement all over it. It's the garden. It's earth in its natural environment. So it's beautiful, and it's unspoiled by human activity, because human activity is occurring in space, and it's occurring in space because you have gravity control. So one basic discovery on how to control gravity, which is basically what launched us into our advanced civilization right now. We made a few discovery about the electromagnetic field. We start to understand it and how to control it, and that produced our current society. The next step is to understand how gravity works at a deeper level, which is some of the equations I wrote gives us that understanding. And and when we do that, how to engineer it to control it. And that just is pretty straightforward. It's pretty simple, and it changes fundamentally our society, of course, because if you have gravity control, you can build ships in space the size of planets if you want to. You know, it's like the size of things is no longer an issue. Um, that may be why you see thousands-ton statues that were moved long distances in very ancient time because the people that were there had this kind of technology. That it might sound really outrageous and outlandish to say that, but the evidence is pretty supportive. So what I'm saying is that that would be my third choice, to see the birth of our society into a space-bound society, and that's liberated from the limitation of the resources of one planet only.
Amazing. That's a very beautiful answer and very high level answer. I would talk to you all day, and I wish I could. I just want to be respectful of your time. I do have a last couple questions, and we can go as long as you want. But the one thing that I thought you might want to touch on was your crystal and the new one of the first technological pieces that you brought out. I don't know if you want to touch base on that, and then I can ask you a final question so you can get on with your day and work on whatever
Yeah.
exciting stuff you're working on.
Yeah, the technology that we just released is a little crystal structure that's grown in a laboratory in a very special way, and that's embedded in a titanium metric. The crystals is suspended in the titanium metric by micro bumpers that are suspending it in silica. There you go. And this um, in silicone, and yeah, so the silicone bumpers suspended so it can oscillate all continuously. The crystal is grown so that and cut so that it's aligned to a very specific axis of relationship to the gravitational field, and it is then placed in a very special chamber from our patented technology that um, further orients the molecular structure of the crystal to this fundamental Planck field, so that the crystal becomes a little bit of like an antenna to that field. It creates a coherent flow of the information in that region of space. And I discovered this in 1999, and then I eventually was able to do a lot of different tests on these crystals, for instance, on their impact on molecular structures around it, um, because those molecules of other things around it are made out of the same Planck field, so they should be impacted. So I used water, and then I found that water was definitely impacted, definitely modified by the crystal. And then if I fed the water to a plant, and we've done thousands of tests now, we get 3 to 4 times increase in the yield of the plant. The plant grows 3 to 4 times faster, it resists pathogens better, and all this. So I thought, hey, since we're made mostly of water, let's start structuring the water of our body, as well. And so how can I make it available for people so that it becomes a wearable technology, like a little vacuum, Planck vacuum oscillator technology that people could wear. And it took me since 99, so it took a long time, 18 years almost, to be able to find a way to produce the technology in a manner that was compatible with production level amount of putting the technology on the market. And so, because the crystal had to be cut very precisely, the amount of, the growth of the crystal, all this stuff, the titanium structure, how it could be built, and all this took a while to figure out. But now we're finally there. We're able to do production. They are in back order already, because we are at the point where we can produce about 1,000 a month, or actually 800 a month. So, if people are interested, they have to order them fast, because the list is growing fast. We're working on getting productions that are going to, exceed that limitation currently, so that we can get more and more of them out there. You can think as well about it as all these little crystals as well going out there into the field. They actually creating coherent bubbles of information in around the world, and transforming the morphogenetic field. So I'm excited about the distribution of the crystals as well. But it is complex technology, and it is difficult to build. So it took me a while, and I'm still fairly limited in the amount of production I can output. But at least I can get 800 to 1,000 of them a month out. So it's exciting to finally get something on the market like this. And so far, the results from people commenting and their experience has been remarkable. And I look forward to more. The more devices are on the way that are going to be more advanced, but as well, people structuring their water, and making a difference in what the water content of their body and so on, can improve, life quality and so on. And I can't say much more than that, but you can imagine. And and of course, I have other technologies coming behind it that are going to be very, very exciting as well. So, you would be surprised how difficult, however it is, to to finance that kind of research, independently, as an independent researcher on our planet, because it's very contrary to what the standard, mainstream is doing. So it's very difficult to find appropriate levels of funding. It's like CERN is able to get $13 billion to look for a little particle. Um, I'm trying to produce gravitational control, with shoelaces and duct tape. So, relative to the CERN budgets. So, it's been a long journey, and but we're finally getting there, and so it's exciting.
Amazing.
Amazing.
Amazing. Yeah, well, the research on just the crystal alone is really outstanding, and it's remarkable when you look at, how structuring the water affects the plants and the seeds, and even being resistant to chemicals and things like that. It's truly extraordinary. So I'm excited for you to release the rest of the research, and to, kind of, be able to talk freely about everything that you're up to, and then also amplify it. I feel like a lot of people out there are trying to do really incredible work, and they're kind of trudging through the mud, so to speak. And so, I'm very excited about the day where you're fully activated, you got the sprinting shoes on, all the right environment, everything you need. So definitely support you and your work, and just want to thank you so much for coming on, and sharing your message and work with me and my audience, and everything that you're doing. So I would ask you questions all day, but I know you got to go. The last one I'll just ask you: is there any message you want to leave the listeners with, or any message to humanity, the world leaders, the scientific community specifically, just anything along those lines?
Well, I'd like to let people know, don't assume that you're separated from the rest of the universe, that you don't matter. You do matter. You are connected, and take the time every day to feel that connection inside of you, because it's real, it's happening, and it actually is not some esoteric woo-woo thing. It's actually the physics of how you're actually made. And and I can support that fully with mathematics and physics to describe it. So don't assume that you're just some microbe in this universe lost in space, orbiting on this planet. You're actually part of an amazing will works of nature. You're part of a community. You're part of a universal flow of information, and you have capacities that you can imagine, if you're just willing to develop them, if you're just willing to realize them and actually become all of that what you are, like, which is already an amazing miracle. That you're alive, that you're able to have 100 trillion cells continuously do incredible miracles to keep you alive. And so that's one thing. As far as what I would have to say to the world leaders is that, there's a beautiful, and I don't mean just political leaders. I mean all leaders, whether they're religious, political, or financial leaders. I would say to them, there's a beautiful, amazing transformation that's occurring on the planet, and it leads to a society that's much more advanced, much more harmonious with the natural world, and much more capable of extending itself across space, across the galaxy, across the solar system, and so on. And they need to understand that this revolution is happening, whether they like it or not. It's sprouting everywhere, inside all the institutions, inside the military complex, inside the agencies, inside the governments, inside the corporations. And it's best to just go with it. It's best for everybody's benefit to support it and go with it, because it's a beautiful revolution. It's a peaceful revolution. It's a revolution towards uh, universal peace, not even world peace. And here I'm touching on something that most people may not be aware of, but it's going towards universal peace. And here I'm just gonna mention the it leads to the ban on proliferation of space war, weapons of space weapons and space wars and so on. And so this is very, very much critical at this point in our history. And if we want to survive, if we want to make that transition, if we want to uh, transcend the difficulties we have with the environment and with overpopulation, with world hunger, with some of the largest, the depletions of our ocean, the pollution of our waters, all this can be completely transformed and transcended by investing significant amount of time and resources in the development of these new understandings that are emerging, not only from my laboratories, but from many different sources around the world. And not to assume that the way things have been are going to be the way things are going to continue to be. So that's my message.
Beautiful. I
I
second that. I
second that. I
support you. I
support you.
support that message. I just want to invite everybody watching to check out the Resonance Academy. It's, where else can they find Resonance Academy and the Art Crystals? I'm almost all the way through, and it is really a beautiful, fantastic course. You don't need to be into science or physics to get immense value from it, although you can go as deep as you'd like. But even just the overview, the upgrade that I've gotten, and the way that I think, and my understanding of the universe and how things are built is just so far beyond. And with what you're saying, you can make pretty big leaps in physics if you take the time to go through the course. So I highly recommend people check that out. Would you just recommend that they go there to learn more about you and your work?
Yeah, absolutely. The Resonance website is the Resonance Science Foundation website is resonance.is. Resonance is, and there they can get to the Resonance Academy and take the course. There's 80 countries taking the course. Thousands of people every month for 2 hours. I answer questions for all the students. And we get to go on these amazing trips, like the one we just did in Egypt, every year, and connect. But even if we don't go on the trips, we get to connect with all the people around the world that's part of this community. And that's a big benefit of the course as well, is that you get to meet people from all around the world that are fantastic thinkers and amazing souls that are like, interested in the same subject. So many people on the course, when we have breakout sessions and all this, and faculty academy meetings like the one yesterday, so many people talk about, wow, this is the only place where I can completely talk like this and be open and just talk my mind and connect with people that are on the same wavelength, um, from all around the world. So I think it's part of the appeal of the course as well, is the community that you're actually participating in, and together we can make this transition, we can make this change happen.
Amazing. Beautiful. Yeah. And you launched the Explorers Lounge now too. So people can go in there and they can see there's a lot of amazing free material just to kind of get into it. And yeah, the faculty and the people in there, I can definitely second that as being a very powerful space to be involved with. So thank you again for your time. Thank you for your work. We didn't go deep into your whole experience, but I have a lot of love and respect for all that you've done. So tons of love and support, and thanks for coming on.
Thank you for having me. I'm really honored. And until next time, may the vacuum be with you.
All right. Take care. See you later. Thanks everybody for watching.